Hello and welcome to the Independent Publishing Conference. I'm Ben Cameron of Cameron Publicity and Marketing, and I'm going to be talking to you about book publicity for indie authors, how to get media attention for your book. Now, Cameron Publicity and Marketing have been around for over 15 years, helping self-published authors to find their audience. We're proud members of the Alliance of Independent Authors, and we offer a 10% discount on our range of services for members of the Alliance. I'm going to be talking to you about publicity. And by publicity, I mean getting attention for your book or your books through the media. So television, radio, newspapers, magazines, and online media, including blogs. Authors often think about publicity and marketing as an afterthought, as something that they do reluctantly once they finish the fun bit of writing their book. But I'm here to tell you that publicity and marketing is actually fun, and it actually is creative if you give it a chance. I wouldn't be doing it myself if it wasn't good fun, and I really enjoy what I do. When I talk about media attention, I mentioned before television, radio, newspapers, magazines, and online media. Each of those different types of media have their own opportunities and their own things that you need to watch out for. So television, obviously, you need to go someplace. You need to be physically present in a studio to be recorded for television. Radio, sometimes you can do radio interviews over the phone, or sometimes you can go into a remote studio, or sometimes you need to go into the actual radio studio where the show's being recorded. Newspapers obviously are a lot less immediate in that you can often do interviews by email or over the phone, and then they write up the interview afterwards. Newspapers, you can also get reviews and other types of coverage, which I'll go through in a bit. Magazines, there are all sorts of magazines out there, and so it might well be the case that your book even crosses over a couple of different kinds of magazines. So, for example, if it's about skiing in Switzerland, then there are magazines about skiing that might well be interested. There are also magazines about travel abroad that might be interested as well. So that's something to watch out for. There are all sorts of magazines, and there's something out there, either magazine or newsletter, whatever the subject of your book is. And then online media. So online media is often online versions of traditional media. So the Guardian online, for example, or the Daily Mail online. Those are just online versions of your regular media. They can also be online only media sources. So something like Vice, for example, or Reddit. You know, there are different ways that you can promote your books through sites that might be news sites, or there might be other types of more social marketing sort of sites. But there are lots you can do with those. And then of course there are blogs, and you probably know about blogs and bloggers and how they promote books, but I'll go into that in a little bit more depth in a minute. When it comes to talking to the media about your book, there are really five main things that you need to keep in mind, and how you go about doing that. Finding the people to talk to, talking to them about it, making sure that they're the right contacts, the right people, and the right media, and how you communicate with the media. So I'll go through these in more depth on following slides, but really it's key media contacts. So finding the right people. The publicity autopsy, which is how to break down your book into areas of interest. And it's not just your book, it's also you as an author, what's interesting about you. The elevator pitch is how you would talk about your book to somebody who doesn't know anything about it in 20 seconds or less. So I'll go through that with you. And targeted key points, so pulling out key publicity points, hooks that the media can tie to your book, and making the most of those points. And then finally, the press release. So how to write a press release, what sort of thing to put into it, and what to do with it once you've done it. Now, when it comes to meeting and talking to the key people in the media that you need to get in touch with, um, there are there are lots of things that you need to keep in mind. So, first is analyzing the media. Really, I just mean consuming the media, using the media, watching TV, watching a program on TV, listening to a radio show, or reading a newspaper. And newspapers are particularly interesting to analyze because if you get, say, a big Sunday paper with all its various sections, and just sit down with it one day and just go through the sections and look at the kind of coverage that are in each of those sections. So you'll have things like travel, and you'll have a book section. You'll have something a bit more careers oriented on how to get jobs. And in any of those sections might well be opportunities for you to get coverage. And there are books that might appeal to, the business section and the book section, for example. So go through a newspaper and really have a look through and see what sort of angles you would pitch it to each of those sections of the newspaper that you think is relevant. Um, Same goes for online media. There are bloggers, for example, who specialize in all sorts of different kinds of books, and so you want to find the right match for your books. And again, if your book is about skiing in Switzerland, there are bloggers who blog about skiing, and there are bloggers who blog about Switzerland. So you want to catch those as well as your more straightforward book bloggers. So as you go through the media, just as you're watching TV and as you're listening to the radio in your day-to-day life, just think about it. Just think about how you might be able to pitch your book to get on that program or get in that newspaper. And also listen out for authors who are being interviewed on those programs as well, because you'll see them. They're on all the time, and they're getting attention for their books that way, and you can do it as well. Types of coverage. So there are lots of different ways that a book can be covered in the media, whether it's newspapers or TV. So there are features, which are articles about a thing or a subject. It's not a book review. It's an article about something that happened or a person. And features often have quotes from people, or you can have more of a full-fledged interview. So, somebody might interview you about your book and then feature that in a magazine or a newspaper, or you can obviously have a lot of interviews on radio and TV as well. And then there's sidebars. So if you just think about magazines in particular, but newspapers do this as well, there will often be hints and tips beside an article. So if an article is about how to find a job, there might be 10 great hints or tips on how to find a job. So if you're pitching a book about job hunting to that magazine, you want to tell them that you're an expert in finding jobs, and also you've got these pithy little, 10 top tips to help people find a job. A lot of magazines love that sort of thing, and that's an extra thing that you can add to what you're offering for them. Now, reviews are what you think of, I think, probably most when you think of publicity. They can be reviews in the book section of the New York Times or the Guardian, or they can be a review in a very niche magazine, or sometimes on radio they'll review books on some programs. So reviews are out there, and I really consider that there are two kinds of reviews. There's the professional critics, professional reviewers in the newspaper, and on the radio, for example. But there are also what I call real people reviews. Those are the reviews that you see for books on Amazon, you see on Goodreads. And there are ways to get to those reviews as well. Be careful that you're not paying for positive reviews. Reviews have to be have to be neutral. You have to offer them the book, and then they give their honest response. That's very, very important because of Amazon's terms and conditions. So by no means should you ever really consider paying for a guaranteed review. But there are reviews that you can pay a media to get, but those are still honest reviews, and those are often worth doing. Um, there's also news. So when you're looking at your newspaper and breaking it down, the first section of the newspaper is really the news section. So that's what's going on in the world. And it can also include commentary on those things. So somebody who's an expert about something that's going on in the world can can talk about that point in the newspaper. Um, so the news section is very important. If you can tie your book to something that's going on in the news, maybe it's a nonfiction book about Switzerland, and there's something happening in Switzerland. Then and you've written a book about it, so maybe you can consider yourself an expert. You can put yourself forward for some sort of a comment piece in a newspaper, or to be interviewed on the radio to talk about Switzerland. Um, so the news section is very important, and it's often something that people don't really consider. But often there are interesting ways that you can get into the news section. The link to current events can be fairly tenuous sometimes, and if you look through a newspaper, you'll see that there are things in there which are just in there because it's a bit of fun, and maybe that's your way in. And then finally, under types of coverage, I have here byline articles. So those are articles that you would write and pitch to the media. And hopefully, if they're interested, they'll take it on. You might get paid for it. You probably won't. These days, they consider it promotion. The value to you is in promotion, and so they don't pay as much as they used to, but sometimes they do. Um, and then after types of coverage, so you're looking at the media, you're figuring out what kind of coverage there is, and then you're really researching the outlets that work for you. In researching those outlets, um, you can often find them, just with a Google search. Or when I first started out, I did most of my research in W.H. Smith's, magazine store. And you can spend a lot of time looking through the magazines, finding out who the writers of the articles that you're interested in are, jotting them down. You can spend a lot of time in a magazine store before they kick you out. And in that time, you can get a lot of valuable contacts that you can use to promote your book. And it's about pinpointing those best people. So you find the right media, the right magazine that writes about travel, and you find in that magazine, for example, there's somebody who focuses on ski holidays, and so that's the person that you want to talk to. That's the person you want to find. So you do your research online, go into a store and look through the magazines. Also, listen to the radio a lot, watch a lot of TV, and find the people who are writing about or talking about your specialist subject area. And those are the people you want to get to. Now, how to get in touch with them? You can email them, and you can email a press release. You can give them an email pitch. Sometimes it works. More often than not, it'll be ignored. So really, you need to go one step further, and if at all possible, give them a call and talk to them about it. Have your elevator pitch ready. I'll go through the elevator pitch in a minute, but be ready to really talk them through concisely what it is about your book that they'd be interested in. And then finally, remember the audience. So the audience, the person that you're talking to, might seem like your audience, that journalist at the Guardian, or that producer at BBC Women's Hour. They might seem like they're your audience, but in fact they're not. Your audience is their audience, and you need to appeal to them because in a way that appeals to their audience. So you need to say your listeners will love this book because of, or your readers will love this book because they're into this sort of thing. So remember that the audience of the media is the important audience, and they're your audience as well. Now, the publicity autopsy. Autopsy sounds a bit violent, and it kind of is, in terms of taking something that's near and dear to you, your book, and breaking it down into something that's really got a commercial purpose. You're selling ideas here, and and that's not necessarily a lot of fun when you think of your book as a whole and this thing that you've worked on for years. But it's absolutely necessary to really look through it dispassionately as somebody who has never seen that book before, and has no idea what it's about. And you need to go through and find out what would be of interest to somebody about it. So that thing that's of interest, it could have to do with the subject matter. You know, that's usually fairly obvious. It might be a novel about somebody who's skiing in Switzerland, and it might be a thriller, a James Bond type thriller set in Switzerland. And so the subject could be thrillers. The subject also could be foreign travel, for example, maybe having something to do with the research that you did, traveling to those locations that you wrote about in your book. So think about your subject. Think about the setting, as I mentioned. It could be the place that your action happens, or it could be, it's not necessarily a country. It could be a type of house that your characters live in. It could be anything. But just think about that setting. If there's something interesting about the book and where it is, that might be something that you can pitch to the media. Your characters, likewise, what makes them special. I'm sure you know very well what makes them special, and you're thinking about this all the time as you write your book. So take out those points that you put in for your characters, and think about whether it's something that reflects, maybe the characters behave in a way that reflects your own life, or maybe something happened to them in the past that happened to you. If it's a nonfiction book, the character might really be more like going out and researching the book, or your readers who would be following in your footsteps. Key points or events in the book. If a book is set in a particular point in history, for example, there might be an anniversary that coincides with that point in history. So, for example, a couple of years ago, there were lots of books about the First World War because of the anniversary, the big anniversary of the First World War. If there's an anniversary that ends, particularly one that ends in a 0 or a 5, that's often something that you can use in promoting a book. At the moment, we're looking at promoting books to do with the author James Baldwin. There's a big anniversary for James Baldwin coming up next year. So, it could be something big, World War II. It could be about a specific author. It could be about a specific person in history. But if there's an anniversary that you can pin your book to, that works really well. Research, so the story behind your book, how you came across what you wrote about, or where you got that idea from. Often that's a good way of promoting that book. And then finally, the USP, the unique selling point. What makes your book special? Why does it stand out from all the others? Really think about that as well. And then there's also, as I mentioned before, it's not just about the book, it's about the author. And author involvement in publicity is really quite important. We do have authors who don't want to be involved, or who might reluctantly do an interview or two, or if they have to, but they don't really want to be that involved. The more you can be involved, the better. Authors often write under a pseudonym, and sometimes for a very good reason. They don't want people to think that people in the book is reflective of family members, or whatever. So often, they do not want to be personally associated with the book. There's some ways you can get around that with the pseudonym. They can be interviewed as that pseudonym rather than under their real name. But it can make things tricky as well. In any case, the more you as a person can be involved in the book publicity experience, the better. So that can have to do with your own personal expertise, your career, things you've done in the past, or things you know about. You might be, what are you an expert in? Everybody's pretty much an expert in something if you really think about it. And don't be shy as well. Don't be afraid to put yourself forward as an expert in something that you know pretty well, because you can do a bit more research and fill in any gaps and have enough um, expertise to do an interview. Personal experience, again, it might be something that's happened to you in the past. It might not even be related to your book at all. It could be, an experience that happened to you, but even that can be, if it's something that's noteworthy or people would be interested in reading about or hearing about, that's something that can be used to promote your book. And if it's not related to your book, that's okay. You can still get a mention of your book in either at the end of the um, newspaper interview, or you'll still get a mention of the book in that radio interview as well. Location, this time I mean where you live. That's quite important because you can get local publicity. You can get publicity in magazines, your local newspapers, on your local radio, and those are quite powerful. Often people dismiss local publicity because it doesn't have a huge audience necessarily, but at the same time, books do get picked up from local publicity by national publicity. So it can happen that something that's covered in a small magazine or small newspaper then finds its way into a large newspaper or a large magazine. It happens all the time. So don't dismiss any opportunity. You need to your opportunities are going to be difficult enough that you shouldn't really be turning them down if you can help it. And then finally, your USP, the unique selling point about you personally. What makes you tick, and why are you doing all this? That's often as an interesting point for the media to take up. And moving on to the elevator pitch. So I mentioned this earlier. The elevator pitch is talking about your book in 20 seconds or less. So, the idea, you probably know what an elevator pitch is, but the idea is if you got into an elevator with somebody really important, and it was just you and them in an elevator, you're going up to the 10th floor, and you've got the time it takes to get up there to sell them on your book. So, you need to be able to just say your elevator pitch anytime, any place. You need to have it down pat. And the best way to do that is to use these five steps. So first, listen to examples. Listen to people talking about their books. Radio is especially good for this. So if you're listening to the radio, whether it's local radio or a national radio station, and there's somebody on who's talking about their books or movies. People are often interviewed, stars are often interviewed for movies, or people are interviewed about musicians are interviewed about albums or songs. Listen to how they describe it. So, they've got to be able to describe that movie or song or book in just, a few seconds. So how do they do it? So listen to how people are doing it. Take notes on who you think does it well, and then think about why they do it well. The key here is obviously to be concise. So you've got 20 seconds. You really don't want to go over it. 20 seconds is quite a long time for an elevator pitch, really. And you've got to really just capture people's imaginations right at the beginning. Just like when you write your book, you want an opening that's going to attract the readers and to keep them gripped. Use references. So it's often the case that if you like this, then you'll love my book. If you like Jack Kerouac, then you'll love my road novel. If you like Catch 22, you'll like my comic war novel. So you don't hesitate to use those references. Don't use them in a way that you're comparing themselves to them. So you might not say it's better than Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but you can say my biggest influence was Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. But if you use references like that, then people will know immediately where they stand with that book. They'll have immediately have something in mind for that book, and they'll know whether it's something that they'll be interested in or not pretty quickly. Remember that every word matters. So you're concise, you're being concise. Only got your 20 seconds. Every word matters. Write it down. Write it down and work it out. So, it's like poetry. So every word has to have a place and it has to be in the right place. And it's 20 seconds. It's not that much to write down. So really make it concise. And really, it's a lot like writing the blurb for your book for the back cover or Amazon. You got a bit more time than you do for those. Um, but even so, you want to make sure that you don't have any extra information that people don't really need. You want to make sure that everything that you're telling them is important or going to create an image in their mind or get them to win them over to your book. And then finally, practice. So practice, practice, practice. Say it lots of times. Say it in front of the mirror. Make sure you do it when nobody's home to hear you or see you. But do practice saying it because it's got to become routine. So when you're at that drinks party and somebody asks what your book is about, you need to be able to rattle it off. And then likewise when you're in that when you're in that lift with the famous publisher, you need to be able to tell them about your book right away in a way that's going to attract them. And on to the press release. So here I've got a couple of press releases for you to look at. I know it's not very big, so you might not be able to read it very well, but I'll talk you through them. And these are a couple of books that we're working on at the moment. They're great books. You should go out and buy them. The first one here is a two-page press release called Painless, Living with Pain, Finding Joy by Anne Welsh. So Anne is and has sickle cell anemia. So she lives her life in pain and every day to some degree there's some pain there. So her book is about the experience of living through pain and also living your best life and having fun and finding joy in life despite that and also managing pain. Um, and it's a great book because for publicity because it's both a memoir, so it's about her growing up with sickle cell and what it's meant to her life. But it's also a self-help guide, and it really she expands it beyond. It's not just about people who suffer sickle cell anemia. It's not people who suffer pain, physical pain. That could well be mental pain. So she brings it into quite a broad area. And it's got lots of great advice. So it's a memoir, but it's got hints and tips and advice, which are really good for the media to cover. So it's a nonfiction book. And as you'll see here in the press release, we've got contact details, which are very important. People need to know how to get in touch with you. We've got the title and the author's name. A bit of a tagline here just to really get across right away what the book is about. And then for this one, she has some really good quotes before the publication of the book that we've used in the press release here. So, and very famous people. So the Director General of the WHO and the Archbishop of York, for example. So, you want to include those sorts of quotes on your press release. They will grab people's attention. And then here I've got the cover, and you usually have about 3 or 4 bullet points where it breaks down different pitching angles that I'm going to use in a campaign. Um, After that, I've got a description of the book. So this is the kind of blurb that's on Amazon. It might be exactly the blurb or probably a slightly shorter version of the blurb on Amazon. And then I've got an author biography here with a picture of her because I had space because this went over into two pages. Ideally, a press release should be one page, but for a lot of the time, it's just not possible to get it in one page. In which case, keep it as concise as possible. But I just go ahead and don't hesitate to go on to a second page. The press release over here is for a novel. It's a crime novel. It's a hard-boiled detective mystery in the 1940s set in London. So it's an American detective in London in the 1940s, and it's very much in the line of Raymond Chandler and the sort of golden age detectives. It has that feel to it because the author herself is very much into those sorts of movies and books. And so Seamus Dust, again, we've got the contact details at the top, the title. She's got her own tagline: "Hard Winter, Cold War, Cool Murder." It's quite nice to have a repetition of sort of three different things. And a publication date here. There wasn't a publication date on Painless because it's a subject that could appeal to people at any time. Painless doesn't necessarily have to be new. It has to be new-ish. But whenever a person in a magazine or a newspaper is writing about sufferers of pain or how to cope with pain, they might be interested in this book. For most fiction, you really want to focus on new. So, you want to do it around the publication date, if at all possible, or not too long after the publication date, and build up the fact that it's new. So again, we've got sort of a little tagline here about the book to give people an idea of what it is, and a quote, and then 3 bullet points, and then a description and about the author. She isn't somebody who is particularly available for interviews. She lives in Malta, I believe. So there's not a lot to say about her, but she actually has quite an interesting background. So I put what I can in there, and then where people can buy the book. So that's the sort of thing you want to have on a press release. And I tend to use a press release as almost like a reference that journalists can look at and find out more about the book. A traditional press release wouldn't look like this at all, but book press releases tend to look more or less along these lines. But a traditional press release for a company coming out with a new product would probably be quite different and might have quotes from somebody talking about what their motivation was for making this product or whatever. But for books, it tends to be more of a reference thing because I'm always aware of the fact that the press release isn't the final thing, that part of my pitch. It's something that people are going to look at and to find out more information or to find out what that publication date or where they can get that book is. But in fact, I'm really going to be talking to people on the phone or in person, or perhaps a more personal email. So I'm not sending a press release to somebody and just expecting them to pick it up. This is something that's in addition to my proper pitch. Now onto social media. So I'm not going to go into properly how to do social media for your book or you as an author. It's a big subject area, and it's worthy of its own presentation in itself. But in terms of how you use social media alongside traditional publicity, it's worth noting a few things. So you can use social media to amplify your traditional media publicity. So by that I mean if you've got a radio interview, you can tweet links to that radio interview. Or if there's a newspaper interview and it's in the online section of the newspaper, you can post on Facebook a link to that article in the newspaper. So you're using it to reach a wider audience than that actual media had in the first place. And it's particularly important for smaller media. So, it could be that your book is reviewed in a very small magazine or even a newsletter. But if that's online, and you have a good social media presence, then you can really make that into something much bigger. than it initially was through social media. Um, so as I said, you can post links to your coverage. Um, and you can post links both before and after they happen. So if you know that a book is going to be reviewed in a newspaper, you can say, look out for the Times on Sunday when my book is going to be reviewed. You can say that before time, and then afterwards you can post a link to that review, and you can post it every now and then for however long you want. We uh, worked with an author who I just noticed a post from him about a radio interview he did a year ago. So, it was, I remember, this interview and it was really great, he was saying, and it's still relevant. So it's absolutely fair enough to post that again. It's just not something you want to do constantly, obviously, and you don't constantly want to even post about your book. You want to include some other things in as well, um, in your social media. But at the same time, you can really extend the sort of coverage that you get. Always remember in social media that imagery and videos are key. If you have an image and or you have, better yet, a video content, then it will get seen by more people. So that tweet will get seen by more people. That Facebook post will get seen by more people. Um, and um, so do always try to include a cover of your book or a video of some sort, or some sort of, something more than just a link to an article, so that it can get out there more widely. And then in general, I also tell people to focus on 2 or 3 social media platforms that work for them. So don't try to cover 10 different social media sites. You just won't be able to do it very well. Focus on just a couple. You might just focus on Facebook or Twitter and Instagram, or whatever works for you. If your book is something visual and there are a lot of, or your life is something visual that you take a lot of pictures and you post them on Instagram, that's definitely the way to go, as opposed to say Twitter, which is very ephemeral. Um, so pick your social media outlets as to what suits you well, and stick with those. And working with a publicist. So as I mentioned before, we run publicity campaigns for authors, and it's a matter of some authors have a lot of time and a lot of the ability to sell themselves, and so and possibly this is you, and so they can do it themselves, or at least to some degree, and that's absolutely great. Or you can learn to do it yourself, and that helps a lot. Others don't have time, or they don't want to promote themselves, or they just want to get on with their next book. In which case you can hire a publicist to do it with you. Now, the thing to remember, is that you still have to be involved. So even if you're working with a publicist, that doesn't mean that you just hide yourself away in your office and just spend all your time typing your next book. You do need to know what's going on. You need to be involved with your campaign. You need to make yourself available for interviews when they come up. So even if you have a publicist, you're not completely out of the picture. You need to help. So these are tips on how to work with a publicist, whoever that publicist is, or even this really goes for any sort of author promotion service. So first off, obviously only work with people or services that you're confident about and that will keep you up to date. There are a lot of people out there in the world, and you know that um, the self-publishing industry is, it has its sharks. So be careful, do your research, and find out about people that you work with. Don't just go into it blindly. Ensure that your project is understood, including key subjects, events, and dates. And that's important. You really need to be talking to somebody and explaining to them why it's important, and they need to demonstrate that they understand that, and that they understand what the key subjects are, or they might have their own ideas. But regardless, they need to have more than a glancing look at your book. They need to really actually sit back and think about it, or better yet, even read it. Um, Make sure your goals are clear, what your expectations are, and make sure that those expectations are realistic and that the person that you're working with or the people that you're working with acknowledge those expectations. And if your expectations aren't realistic, um, that's fine as long as they say, they need to have the ability to say, I don't think you're going to achieve that. We can try, but I think it's probably unlikely. This is the level of interview that you're probably going to get. So have that dialogue, and don't be put off if they say, realistically, this is probably a better fit for you in the media than this gigantic radio show that you're hoping for. Um, so take that on board. Um, when you're working with a publicist, be really nice to them. They're really nice people. And you want to be nice to them as well because you're a nice person too. But also be just a little bit pushy, so kind of, ask how it's going every now and then if you haven't heard from them for a few days, or make little suggestions every now and then. Just be, a friendly pushy. Um, never goes wrong because just remind them that you're there and that you're waiting for information. It never hurts. Um, Compare contacts and suggest outlets for journalists. So we publicists work with all sorts of contacts and all sorts of subject areas. So it could be anything from that skiing journalist to somebody who writes in the newspaper about mental health, for example. So it could be really anything that your subject matter is. So just make sure that your publicist knows what sort of things that media that you think would be interested in as well. Don't assume that they know everything. I mean, they might well know the media contacts at the places that you're thinking of too. But it never hurts to just go through and just make sure that they're thinking of everything that you're thinking of, because there's a lot of media out there. And then at the end, insist on an end of promotion chat. So just make sure they bring you up to date on what has happened during the campaign, what sort of coverage you've had. There might well be still things that are outstanding and are still to happen. But just have that chat and find out what your next step is, where you can go from there. And there you go. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I've been Ben Cameron from Cameron Publicity Marketing. You can find out more about us and what we do. We have all sorts of different types of publicity services, and you can find them at cameronpm.co.uk. Or you can email us at info@cameronpm.co.uk, or you can find us on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram as well. So just search us out on those and you'll find us. Do keep in touch. I mean, we'd love to hear how you're getting on. We love to answer people's questions and help along the way as well. So don't hesitate to just get in touch and one of us will get back to you about any queries that you have. And if you're interested in a campaign or something, that's great as well. We would love to talk to you too. Thank you very much. Bye.